Do you love the depth in a cat's eye but don't know how to put it on paper? This video will help you with that, as I'm going to teach you how to draw a realistic cat eye. By the end of this video, you will learn tips and tricks to bring your art to life using a lot of depth. The time to start has come. Let's pick up the tools and get started. For this video, I'm going to use PanPastel. If you have never heard about them, they are basically a compressed powder stored in a round small container. They are very pigmented and a real time saver. I'm going to use them as an underpainting for my color pencils to speed up the whole drawing process. My choice for color pencils will always be Faber-Castell Polychromos and Caran d'Ache Luminance. Polychromos are oil-based, which means they have a harder lid, and Caran d'Ache are wax-based, which means they have a creamier lid, making them ideal to be used together. I ended up not using all the colors. To apply PanPastel, you need of course an applicator. In this case, I'm going to use some sponges. I am using the blue big ones called Soft Tools and some very cheap eyeshadow applicators because the first ones can get very expensive and the sponges can get damaged very fast. I have started drawing with some PanPastel layers. They will guide me where to create some shadows and highlights later on in the drawing. By using the triangular shaped tool, I carefully applied a very light layer of turquoise, using the same pressure everywhere to avoid leaving marks behind. The paper I'm using is Fabriano Artistico watercolor paper. It is ideal for this method as the PanPastel adheres very well on its surface. A very important trick to create a more even surface is to use a circular motion when applying the powder to the paper. This will distribute the powder evenly over the texture of it. To add more depth, I mixed turquoise with some dark blue on a separate sheet before applying it to the paper. I usually just use some plain printing paper to blend the colors. That way, you have an idea of what the color will look like before you use it for the drawing, avoiding the risk of ruining the artwork if you apply the new color directly onto it. As can be seen in my demo, I drew around the highlight, keeping that part as white as possible. Because in most cases, when I'm drawing an eye, the shadow will be cast on the top of the iris, I lightly tapped the sponge in the dark indigo PanPastel to mark that area, then did the same with the black one. I usually shy away from using pure black, but in this case the dark shadow really was black. Another trick to use each side of the sponge in the most effective way is to leave the triangular side flat only for large areas and the tip only for small areas, in this case the eye contour. Speaking of the sponge, another of its attributes is to create the iris texture. From my demo you can see how easily and quickly the eye comes to life using the previous tip. Even if the lines are too thick, it's not a problem as they will be covered by the pencil later. At this stage I don't worry too much about everything being perfect because it's only the first coat and mistakes can still be corrected. The only thing to keep in mind is to create the lines in a 360 degrees direction. Under no circumstances should they only be done in one direction because it will give the drawing a very false and flat effect. The deeper I get into creating the layers, the more I realize that some areas need to be darkened or other small alterations. Towards the end, I switched to an eyeshadow applicator for creating lines to show you that it's about as good as a more expensive sponge. The only flaw I found about this item is that it absorbs too much powder, and if it is used over a darker layer created previously, will wipe away almost all of the pigment applied, leaving behind many gaps. For the inner corner of the eye, I used a combination of Faber-Castell Polychromos and Caran d'Ache color pencils. I decided not to apply PanPastel in this area at all because it is very small and I have more precision using only the pencils. The paper I'm using, called Fabriano Artistico, still has some texture after the pencil is applied, so I had to apply the method called burnishing. If you don't know what it is, burnishing involves layering and blending until no paper tooth shows through the color pencil layers. Most artists use a white pencil, a lighter color, or a colorless blender. This technique requires a paper that allows the construction of many layers. The key in achieving a realistic drawing is to work in layers from light to dark. Don't be afraid to add dark colors where needed or very light ones, as they create that depth the drawing needs to be realistic. I avoided using a very vibrant pink color because it will give the drawing an unnatural look. I chose to keep this area as simple as possible, as the main focus was the iris. Now it's time to dive in the most beautiful but tedious part of the drawing, which is creating the details in pencil. I started with little touch-ups in some areas to add some shading or to fill in the gaps left by PanPastel. When using PanPastel, you have to be very careful with the amount of powder you add to the paper, as the texture of the paper can be filled too quickly if you are not being careful, leaving almost no room for the color pencils. So I prefer to apply as little as possible and retouch afterwards with the pencils. To create the iris effect, I drew a lot of lines in a 360 degrees direction, following the places marked with the PanPastel. Now you can see how helpful they are. The pencil has to be very sharp at this stage of the drawing to achieve some very thin lines. I didn't start directly using very dark lines, instead I'm using a very light pressure to mark again the direction of the lines. Kind of a second base layer. Again, I didn't touch the highlight at all yet, drawing around it again and being very careful to keep its original shape. Around the pupil, I used the brown because the eye is not entirely blue in that area. This area is always one of the darkest. This small touch-up adds a lot of realism to the drawing. All I did was to keep increasing the pressure on the pencil to get darker and darker lines, and I was being very careful to follow the 360 degrees direction. I also used the sky blue pencil to add more vibrancy to the eye, and sometimes a black pencil for more depth, and I made sure to always have the tip of the pencil sharp. The more contrast the eye has between the light and the dark, the more realistic it will be in the end. To save as much of the pencil as possible, instead of sharpening it losing a lot of the pencil, I purchased a very small sandpaper special for pencils, and when the tip gets too dull, I sharpen it using the sandpaper by rubbing the pencil tip on its surface until it gets sharp again. What, in my view, made the highlight realistic are those reflections of the fur around the... To achieve this, I simply created some lines in all directions with the black pencil, using strong pressure. Avoid drawing them only in one direction to avoid a false effect. To be sure you don't make that mistake, plan in advance where every pencil stroke will be placed, as they will almost be impossible to erase afterwards due to the heavy pressure applied. After finishing the reflection, I added some more contrast here and there. The more we advance in the drawing, the more we realize that some areas are not dark or light enough as we thought before, so a continuous retouching is a tip that must be kept in mind. To create a wet looking effect, I used my beloved white gel pen, which is amazing for this kind of details, but not recommended for commissioned work as it can get yellow in time due to it not being archival. I always mention this in my videos where I'm using this tool, because I find it very important for other artists to be aware of this side effect. A safe alternative is a very tiny brush dipped into white acrylic. In the end, I used the white Caran d'Ache white pencil to add another small reflection in the upper left side to increase the interest in that area and make it stand out more. Now we came to an end of the video. I really hope you enjoyed it and you've learned a lot from it. I am posting one time a week and normally graphite, color pencil or pastel related videos, so if you don't want to miss any of those, please hit that subscribe button and the bell button as well to be notified every time a video goes live, and I really hope I'm going to see you in the next one as well. Have a nice day. Bye guys!